The morning sun barely touched the stone walls of Kensington Palace when Marcus Hayes arrived for his shift. He had been a royal guard for 12 years, and in all that time, he had seen many strange things. But nothing could prepare him for what he would find that cold November. Day. Marcus was responsible for the West Wing storage area, a place most people forgot existed. Dust covered everything, and boxes sat stacked from floor to ceiling. The palace administration had asked him to clear out some old items to make room for new security equipment. It was supposed to be a simple task, something he could finish before lunch. He walked through the narrow hallway, his boots echoing against the marble floor. The storage room smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. Marcus pulled out his flashlight and began sorting through boxes labeled with dates from decades ago. Most contained old documents, ceremonial cloths, and retired uniforms that nobody wanted anymore. Hours passed as he worked. His back ached from lifting heavy boxes, and his uniform stuck to his skin from the dust. He was about to take a break when he noticed something unusual. In the far corner of the room, hidden behind a tall shelf, there was an old trunk. It looked different from everything else. The leather was worn but still intact, and brass locks held it shut. Marcus felt curious. The trunk had no label, no marking to show who it belonged to or when it was stored there. He dragged it out into the light, coughing as dust flew into the air. The trunk was heavier than he expected. He tried the locks, but they would not open. He searched the room for a key, but found nothing. After 30 minutes of trying, Marcus decided to call his supervisor. James Peterson arrived 20 minutes later, looking annoyed at being interrupted during his morning tea. But when he saw the trunk, his expression changed. James was older than Marcus, close to retirement, and had worked at the palace for over 30 years. "I have never seen this before," James said quietly, running his hand over the leather surface. "We should open it carefully. Sometimes these old trunks contain important items." They found tools and carefully broke the old locks. The metal gave way with a loud crack that echoed through the storage room. Both men held their breath as Marcus slowly lifted the heavy lid. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth that had yellowed with age, was a uniform. But this was not just any uniform. Marcus carefully lifted it out and held it up to the light. It was a Royal Guard uniform, similar to what he wore every day, but this one was different. It was smaller, clearly made for someone much shorter than the average guard. The fabric was old but well preserved. The royal insignia was perfectly stitched onto the chest. James stepped closer, his face pale. "That cannot be what I think it is," he whispered. Marcus looked at the name tag sewn into the collar. His hand started shaking as he read the name written in faded but clear letters. Charlotte Hayes. His breath caught in his throat. Hayes was his surname. Could this be related to his family? "We need to report this immediately," James said, reaching for his phone. His voice was urgent now, not annoyed anymore. Marcus could not stop staring at the uniform. Questions flooded his mind. Who was Charlotte Hayes? Why was her uniform hidden in a trunk? And why did nobody ever mention that a woman with his last name had served as a royal guard? Within an hour, the storage room filled with people. Palace administrators arrived first, followed by historians from the royal archives. Everyone spoke in hushed voices, looking at the uniform as if it were made of gold. Marcus stood in the corner, still holding the name tag, trying to understand what was happening. Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, the head of Royal Archives, examined the uniform with gloved hands. She was a thin woman, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She measured the uniform, checked the stitching, and photographed every detail. After what felt like forever, she turned to the group. "This uniform is authentic," she announced. "Based on the style and materials, it dates back to 1952, possibly earlier. But according to all official records, women were not allowed to serve as royal guards until 2007. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at each other, confused and shocked. How could there be a woman's guard uniform from 1952 when women were not permitted in that role? Marcus finally spoke up. "My grandfather's sister was named Charlotte. My father rarely talked about her. He said she disappeared when he was young, and the family never found out what happened to her."
Oh.
Dr. Monroe turned to look at him. "Do you have any photographs or documents about her?" Marcus shook his head. My father died 5 years ago. He never wanted to discuss her. It was like talking about Charlotte made him sad, so we stopped asking questions. We need to dig deeper into this, Dr. Monroe said firmly. If Charlotte Hayes served as a royal guard in 1952, she broke every rule that existed. And if her service was hidden, we need to know why. The palace officials exchanged worried looks. This discovery could change everything people knew about royal history. It could raise uncomfortable questions about secrets the palace had kept for decades. Marcus was told to continue his work. But his mind was not on sorting boxes anymore. He kept thinking about the uniform, about Charlotte, about why her story was buried and forgotten. That night, he could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what his great-aunt had gone through. The next morning, the palace was buzzing with whispered conversations. News of the discovery had spread among the staff, though the public knew nothing yet. Marcus was called to a meeting with senior palace officials. They sat in a wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and polish. Lord Ashford, a senior advisor, spoke first. "Mr. Hayes, we understand this discovery is personal for you. We want to handle this matter with sensitivity and respect. However, we also need to protect the reputation of the monarchy." Marcus felt anger rise in his chest. "With respect, sir, my great-aunt deserves more than being hidden away again. If she served here, people should know about it," Lord Ashford sighed. "We are not suggesting we hide anything. We simply want to investigate properly before making any public statements. False information could damage many people." Dr. Monroe entered the room carrying a thick folder. "I spent all night going through old records," she said, looking exhausted. "I found something." In 1952, there was a security crisis at the palace. Several guards were suddenly dismissed, but the records do not explain why. Around the same time, there are gaps in the duty rosters, days where no one is listed as being on certain posts. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. "It means someone deliberately removed information from the records. Whatever happened with Charlotte was serious enough that people wanted it erased from history." Marcus felt cold despite the warm room. What had Charlotte done? Or what had been done to her? Dr. Monroe continued. "I also found this." She pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1952. The headline read, "Unexplained Incident at Palace Raises Questions." The article was short and vague, mentioning that palace officials refused to comment on reports of unusual activity at the palace. This ran in only one newspaper, Dr. Monroe explained. The next day, that newspaper published a retraction saying the story was based on false information. But I believe the first article was true, and someone with power made them take it back. Lord Ashford looked uncomfortable. "This is exactly what concerns us. If we open this investigation, we might uncover things that are better left in the past." "Better for whom?" Marcus asked sharply. "Not for Charlotte. Not for my family, who never knew what happened to her." The room fell silent. Finally, Lord Ashford nodded slowly. "You are right. We will continue the investigation. Dr. Monroe, you have full access to all archives. Mr. Hayes, if you wish to be involved, we will keep you informed." Marcus thanked them and left the room. As he walked through the palace corridors, he passed the portraits of past royals hanging on the walls. They stared down at him with painted eyes, keeping their secrets. But Marcus was determined. He would find out what happened to Charlotte Hayes, no matter what it took. The discovery of the uniform had opened a door that had been locked for over 70 years. Behind that door lay a story of courage, sacrifice, and possibly betrayal. Marcus did not know what he would find, but he knew he could not stop searching now. Charlotte's silence had lasted long enough. Dr. Monroe worked tirelessly for the next 3 days. Marcus joined her in the archives whenever his guard duties allowed. The room was filled with endless shelves of old documents, photographs, and records. Everything smelled of age and paper. They searched through personnel files, duty rosters, and correspondence from 1952. On the 4th day, they found something important. It was a personal diary belonging to a former head guard named Thomas Blackwell. The diary was not part of the official records. Someone had tucked it away in a box of personal effects that Black's family had donated to the palace. After his death in 1989, Marcus sat beside Dr. Monroe as she carefully turned the fragile pages. Most entries were boring notes about daily duties and weather. But then they reached November 1952. Blackwell's handwriting changed, becoming rushed and emotional. November 12, 1952. Today, I witnessed something extraordinary. A young woman presented herself at the guard quarters, dressed in a properly fitted uniform. She claimed she had been secretly training for 2 years and wished to serve as a royal guard. I should have turned her away immediately. Women have no place in this position. But there was something about her determination that made me listen.
Ow.
Dr. Monroe looked at Marcus. This has to be Charlotte. They continued reading. November 15th, 1952. The woman's name is Charlotte Hayes. She knows more about security protocols than some of my trained men. She can shoot, fight, and has studied the palace layout extensively. I made an enormous mistake. I agreed to let her train with the night guards, away from public view. If anyone discovers this, I will lose everything. Marcus felt his heart pounding. His Gratinette had not stumbled into this role. She had fought for it, prepared for it, demanded it. The diary entries continued for weeks. Blackwell wrote about Charlotte's progress, her skills, and her dedication. He also wrote about his growing fear of being discovered. Then came an entry from December 1952 that changed everything. December 20th, 1952, disaster. Prince Edward was walking in the garden late at night, something he never does. A man jumped from the shadows with a knife. Charlotte was on duty in that sector. She reacted instantly. She tackled the attacker and disarmed him before anyone else could respond. The prince is safe because of her. But now dozens of people know about her presence here. I do not know what will happen next. Dr. Monroe and Marcus stared at each other in shock. Charlotte had saved a prince's life. This was not just a story about breaking rules. This was a story about heroism that had been completely erased from history. They read on. December 22nd, 1952. Emergency meeting with palace officials. They are furious that I allowed a woman to serve as a guard. They say it makes the entire security force look weak and foolish. They do not care that she saved Prince Edward's life. They only care about the scandal this could create. December 23rd, 1952. Charlotte has been dismissed. She accepted it without argument, though I could see the pain in her eyes. She asked only one thing, that her service be recorded somewhere, that her work be acknowledged. I promised her I would try. But I know I am lying. The officials have made it clear that all evidence of her presence must disappear. December 24th, 1952, Charlotte came to see me one last time. She gave me her uniform and asked me to keep it safe. She said, maybe one day when the world was ready, people would understand what she tried to do. I locked the uniform in a trunk and hid it in the storage room. I am a coward. I should have fought for her. Instead, I am helping erase a hero. That was the last entry about Charlotte. Marcus felt tears on his face. He wiped them away quickly, embarrassed, but Dr. Monroe was crying too. She was amazing, Dr. Monroe whispered, and they threw her away like garbage. Marcus stood up, angry now. We need to find out what happened to her after she left the palace. She was my family. Someone must know something. Dr. Monroe nodded. I will contact genealogy experts and historical societies. You should talk to any remaining family members. Someone might remember something useful. Marcus thought about this. His father's generation was mostly gone. But his father had a younger brother, Uncle Peter, who still lived in Cornwall. Peter was 80 years old now, but his mind was still sharp. Marcus had not visited him in over a year. That weekend, Marcus drove 4 hours to Cornwall. Uncle Peter lived in a small cottage near the sea. When Marcus arrived, the old man was in his garden, trimming roses. He looked surprised to see his nephew. Marcus, my boy, what brings you here? They went inside and drank tea. Marcus explained everything about finding the uniform, the diary, and what they had learned about Charlotte. Uncle Peter listened in silence, his cup shaking slightly in his hands. When Marcus finished, Peter sat quietly for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I was only 8 years old when Charlotte left, but I remember her. She was my favorite person in the world. She used to tell me stories about becoming a knight, protecting people, being brave. The adults thought she was foolish, that she had silly dreams. But she was serious. She trained in secret, learning everything she could about fighting and security. Peter stood up and walked to an old cabinet. He pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph. It showed a young woman in her 20s, standing straight and proud. She had dark hair pulled back tightly and eyes that seemed to challenge the camera. She wore civilian clothes, but Marcus could see the strength in her posture. "That is Charlotte," Peter said softly. "This is the only picture of her that survived. When she disappeared, my mother destroyed all other photos. She said Charlotte had brought shame to the family." "Disappeared?" Marcus asked. "What do you mean?" "After she left the palace, Charlotte came home for Christmas. But she was different, broken somehow. She barely spoke. On New Year's Day, 1953, she packed a small bag and left. She said she needed to find a place where she could be herself. Nobody ever saw her again." Marcus felt sick. "Did anyone look for her?" Peter nodded sadly. "My father hired a detective. They traced her to London, where she had rented a small room. But after that, the trail went cold. It was like she vanished into thin air." "Maybe she changed her name," Marcus suggested. "Started over somewhere new?" "That is what I always hoped," Peter said. "That she found peace somewhere, lived a good life under a different identity. But we never knew for certain." Marcus took the photograph carefully. "May I borrow this? Dr. Monroe might be able to use it in the investigation." "Keep it," Peter said. "Charlotte would want her story told. I am too old to carry her secrets anymore." Before Marcus left, Peter told him one more thing. "Charlotte wrote me a letter just once, about 6 months after she disappeared. She did not say where she was, but she said she was working with people who appreciated her skills. She said she finally felt useful again. Then nothing. That was the last I ever heard from her." Marcus drove back to London with his mind racing. Charlotte had not given up. She had found another way to serve, to use her training. But where? And doing what? When he returned to the palace on Monday, Dr. Monroe had news. She had found records of women who worked in intelligence services during the 1950s. It was rare, but it happened. Women who could not serve openly in military or security roles sometimes found positions in spy agencies. "I contacted the National Archives," Dr. Monroe explained. "Many intelligence files from that era are still classified. But I submitted a formal request to review any files related to Charlotte Hayes. If she worked in intelligence, there might be records." Weeks passed. Marcus continued his guard duties, but his mind was always on Charlotte. The palace officials were getting nervous. News of the uniform's discovery had not been made public yet, but staff members were talking. It was only a matter of time before a journalist heard something. Lord Ashford called another meeting. "We need to decide how to handle this situation," he said. "We can either release the information ourselves, controlling the narrative, or wait until it leaks and face harder questions." "We should tell the truth," Marcus said firmly. "Charlotte earned that much." Before anyone could respond, Dr. Monroe rushed into the room, holding a folder. "You need to see this," she said, breathless. "The National Archives just sent over a file. Charlotte Hayes did work in intelligence. She was recruited in January 1953 by MI5. She spread documents across the table. There were photographs of Charlotte in plain clothes, conducting surveillance. There were reports she had written about monitoring suspected spies. There were commendations for her excellent work. She spent 10 years working for MI5, Dr. Monroe explained. She was one of their best field agents. She worked undercover in multiple countries, gathering intelligence during the Cold War. Her work helped prevent several security breaches." Marcus felt pride swelling in his chest. Charlotte had not been defeated. She had found another way to serve her country, and she had excelled at it. "What happened to her after that?" Lord Ashford asked quietly. Dr. Monroe's expression changed. "That is where the records end. In 1963, Charlotte was assigned to a mission in East Berlin. She never returned. She was declared missing in action, presumed dead. The room fell silent. Marcus felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Charlotte had given everything for her country, and still nobody had honored her sacrifice. "This changes everything," Lord Ashford said finally. "We cannot keep this quiet anymore." Charlotte Hayes was a hero twice over, first at the palace, then in intelligence work. The public deserves to know about her. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He thought about the uniform hidden in that trunk for 70 years, waiting to tell its story. He thought about Charlotte's courage, her determination, her sacrifice. She had lived in a time that told women they could not do certain things. She had proved everyone wrong. Now, finally, her silence would end. The palace decided to hold a press conference. It was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Giving them time to prepare properly, Dr. Monroe spent every day organizing documents, photographs, and evidence. Marcus helped whenever he could, taking time off from his regular duties, but something bothered Marcus. The intelligence files said Charlotte was presumed dead, but they never found her body. There was no grave, no memorial, nothing. He could not shake the feeling that there was more to the story. One evening, while reviewing documents in the archives, Marcus noticed something odd. In Charlotte's MI5 file, there was a note about her emergency contact. It listed a name, Margaret Whitmore, relationship noted as close friend. Marcus had seen that name somewhere before. He searched through all the papers they had collected. Finally, he found it. Margaret Whitmore had also worked for MI5 in the 1950s and 1960s. Her file was thinner than Charlotte's, but it was there. "Dr. Monroe," Marcus called out. "Did you see this?" Charlotte had a close friend who worked with her. Dr. Monroe came over and examined the papers. Margaret Whitmore. According to this, she retired from MI5 in 1985 and moved to Edinburgh. But that was 40 years ago. She could be dead by now. Or she could still be alive, Marcus said hopefully. She would be in her 90s, but it is possible. They contacted the National Archives again, requesting any current information about Margaret Whitmore. 3 days later, they received surprising news. Margaret Whitmore was indeed still alive. She lived in a care home in Edinburgh and was 94 years old. Marcus immediately requested leave from work. Lord Ashford approved it. Understanding the importance of finding anyone who had known Charlotte personally, Dr. Monroe decided to accompany him. They took a train to Edinburgh the next morning. The care home was a pleasant building with well-kept gardens. A nurse led them to a sunny sitting room where an elderly woman sat by the window, reading a book. She looked up as they entered. Her eyes were cloudy with age, but her gaze was still sharp. "Margaret Whitmore?" Dr. Monroe asked gently. "That is me," the old woman replied. The nurse said someone wanted to talk about old times. "I do not get many visitors these days." Marcus and Dr. Monroe sat down. Marcus carefully pulled out the photograph of Charlotte. "Do you remember this woman?" Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. "Charlotte," she whispered. "My God, Charlotte. Where did you get this?" Marcus explained everything. Finding the uniform, the diary, the intelligence files, and what they had learned about Charlotte's life. Margaret listened intently, wiping tears from her wrinkled cheeks. When Marcus finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice stronger than before. "I knew Charlotte for 15 years. We met during intelligence training in 1953. She was the best agent I ever worked with. Brave, smart, and absolutely fearless. She told me about the palace, about saving the prince, about being thrown away like she was nothing. It made her angry, but it also made her determined to prove her worth. The files say she disappeared in East Berlin in 1963, Dr. Monroe said carefully. Is that true?" Margaret's expression changed. She looked around the room nervously, as if checking if anyone else was listening. Then she leaned forward and spoke quietly. "What I am about to tell you is something I have kept secret for 60 years. I could get in trouble even now, but I am 94 years old. I do not care about rules anymore." Marcus and Dr. Monroe moved closer. "Charlotte did not die in East Berlin," Margaret said. "The mission went wrong, yes. She was supposed to extract a scientist who wanted to defect to the West, but the East German secret police knew about the plan. They were waiting. Charlotte managed to get the scientist out, but she was wounded, shot in the shoulder. Margaret paused, remembering. We got her back to West Berlin, but her cover was completely blown. The East Germans knew her face, her identity, everything. MI5 decided it was too dangerous for her to continue working in the field. But Charlotte refused to retire. She said she had spent her whole life being told she could not do things, and she was not going to stop now. So what happened? Marcus asked. MI5 made a deal with her. They would officially declare her dead, giving her a completely new identity. She would continue working for British intelligence. But in a different capacity, somewhere the Soviets would never look for her.
Marcus
felt his pulse racing. Where did she go? Margaret smiled slightly. She spent the next 20 years working in various African countries during their independence movements. She helped train new governments and security procedures, identified Soviet agents trying to gain influence, and protected British interests. She was brilliant at it. Nobody suspected that a middle-aged British woman working as a teacher was actually one of MI5's most effective agents. Dr. Monroe was writing everything down frantically. This is incredible. Why was it kept secret? Because officially acknowledging her work would have put her in danger, Margaret explained. Even after the Cold War ended, there were people who would have wanted revenge against her. MI5 decided it was safer to let the world believe she died in 1963. Is she still alive? Marcus asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Margaret's smile faded. Charlotte died in 1998. She was 71 years old. She had retired to Kenya, living under her false identity. I visited her there once, in 1995. She had a small house near the coast. She taught children at a local school and was loved by everyone in the village. Marcus felt tears coming again. Did she ever regret it? Giving up her real identity, her family? I asked her that, Margaret said softly. She told me that she stopped being Charlotte Hayes the day the palace dismissed her. Everything after that was just finding new ways to serve. She said she had a good life, that she found peace doing work that mattered. But yes, I think she was lonely sometimes. She never married, never had children. The work was her life. Margaret reached into a pocket in her cardigan and pulled out an envelope. Charlotte sent me this letter in 1997, about a year before she died. She asked me to keep it until someone came looking for her story. She said, someday, perhaps when the world was different, someone would find the uniform. She wanted them to know the truth. With shaking hands, Marcus took the envelope. Inside was a letter written in neat handwriting. He read it aloud. To whoever finds my uniform, I hope the world has changed since my time. I hope women can serve their country openly in any capacity they choose, without hiding or pretending. I did not seek glory or recognition. I only wanted to be useful, to protect people, to make a difference. If my story can help others believe in themselves, then all the secrets and sacrifices were worth it. I lived a life I am proud of, even if it was not the life I originally planned. Be brave, whoever you are. The world needs brave people. With respect, Charlotte Hayes. The room was silent except for the sound of crying. All three of them were in tears. Dr. Monroe finally spoke. We need to tell this entire story at the press conference. Not just the palace part, but everything. Charlotte deserves that. Margaret nodded. I have photographs from Africa, from our time together in MI5. I kept them all these years. You can have them. She stood up slowly and walked to her room. She returned with a box filled with photographs, letters, and documents. There was Charlotte in the 1950s, young and determined. Charlotte in the 1960s, older but still strong. Charlotte in the 1980s, gray-haired but smiling, surrounded by African children. Marcus looked through each photograph carefully. This was his great-aunt, the woman who had been erased from his family's history. She looked happy in many of the photos, especially the ones from Africa. Maybe she really had found peace. Thank you, Marcus, said to Margaret. Thank you for keeping her memory alive. Margaret patted his hand. She talked about her family sometimes. She wondered if anyone would remember her, if anyone would care. Now, I can rest knowing that someone did care. Someone came looking. Before they left, Margaret said one more thing. Charlotte told me that her greatest hope was that future generations would not have to fight as hard as she did. She wanted women to serve alongside men as equals, without question or controversy. Has that happened yet? Marcus thought about the female guards he worked with every day at the palace. They were respected, skilled, and treated as equals. Yes, he said, it has happened. Charlotte's dream came true. Margaret smiled. Good, that is good. Marcus and Dr. Monroe traveled back to London with a box full of Charlotte's hidden history. They had found more than they ever expected. Charlotte Hayes was not just a woman who briefly served as a royal guard. She was a hero who had given her entire life to serving her country, even when that country refused to acknowledge her. The press conference was now more than just correcting a historical record. It was about honoring a life of courage and sacrifice. It was about showing the world that heroes come in many forms. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose stories were deliberately hidden. As the train rolled through the countryside, Marcus looked out the window. He thought about Charlotte standing in the palace gardens, stopping an assassin. Charlotte in East Berlin, risking her life to save a defector. Charlotte in Africa, teaching children while secretly protecting British interests. She had lived a dozen lives, and nobody had known. But now they would know. In 1 week, the world would learn about Charlotte Hayes. Marcus felt proud to be related to her, proud to carry her name. He wished he could have met her, thanked her, told her that she mattered. Dr. Monroe interrupted his thoughts. What will you say at the press conference? They will want to hear from you. Marcus had not thought about that. He was just a guard, not a public speaker. But Charlotte had not let fear stop her, so he would not either. I will tell them the truth, Marcus said. That Charlotte Hayes was everything a guard should be, brave, skilled, and dedicated. And that the palace made a terrible mistake by hiding her service. We cannot change the past, but we can make sure the future remembers her properly. Dr. Monroe nodded. She would be proud of you. Marcus hoped so. He hoped that wherever Charlotte was, she knew that her story was finally being told. The silence that had lasted for 70 years was about to end, and her voice would be heard at last. The morning of the press conference arrived cold and gray. Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his uniform. He had polished every button until it shone. Charlotte deserved that much respect. The palace communications team had been preparing for days. They knew this story would be big news. Secret female royal guard from 1952, a heroic act, a cover-up, and a life spent in intelligence service. It had everything the media loved, but Lord Ashford had made one thing very clear to everyone. This was not about creating drama or embarrassing the palace. This was about finally giving Charlotte Hayes the recognition she had earned. Focus would be on her courage, not on the institution's mistakes. Dr. Monroe met Marcus in the hallway outside the press room. She looked nervous but determined. She carried a folder with all the documents, photographs, and evidence they had gathered. Margaret's photographs were carefully organized, showing Charlotte's entire life. Are you ready? She asked Marcus. He took a deep breath. As ready as I will ever be. They walked into the press room together. It was packed with journalists, cameras, and lights. Marcus had never seen so many people in one place. His hands started sweating, but he remembered Charlotte facing down an assassin in the dark. If she could do that, he could face some cameras. Lord Ashford stood at the podium, cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. Thank you all for coming. Today we are here to correct a historical injustice and honor a hero who has been forgotten for too long. In 1952, a young woman named Charlotte Hayes served briefly as a royal guard at this palace. Her service was kept secret because, at that time, women were not permitted in such roles. During her short time here, she saved the life of a member of the royal family by stopping an assassination attempt. The room erupted with noise. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Lord Ashford raised his hand for silence. Please, let me finish. Charlotte was dismissed after the incident, not because she failed in her duty, but because her presence challenged the rules of that era. She left the palace, But she did not give up serving her country. She joined MI5 and spent decades working in intelligence, protecting Britain's interests around the world. She lived under a false identity for much of her life and was officially declared dead in 1963, though she actually lived until 1998. Lord Ashford stepped back, and Dr. Monroe approached the podium. She explained the discovery of the uniform, the investigation, and everything they had learned. She showed photographs of Charlotte at different stages of her life. The room remained mostly quiet now, journalists furiously taking notes. Then it was Marcus's turn. He walked to the podium on shaky legs. He looked out at all the faces staring at him. For a moment, his mind went blank. Then he thought about the letter Charlotte had written, about her hope that the world would change. "My name is Marcus Hayes," he began. "Charlotte was my great-aunt, though I never knew her. Finding her uniform changed my life. Learning her story made me proud to share her name." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Charlotte lived in a time when women were told they could not do certain jobs, could not serve in certain ways. She refused to accept that. She trained in secret, prepared herself, and demanded the chance to prove her worth. When the palace rejected her, she found other ways to serve. She never gave up, never stopped believing she had something valuable to offer. Marcus pulled out Charlotte's photograph, the one Uncle Peter had given him. He held it up for the cameras. "This is Charlotte Hayes. Not a secret or a scandal, but a hero. She protected people her entire life. She saved a prince. She saved a scientist. She helped new nations build security systems. She taught children in Africa while stopping Soviet spies. She gave everything to her country and asked for nothing in return." His voice grew stronger. "Today I work as a royal guard, the same job Charlotte was denied. I work alongside women who are every bit as capable as any man. They do not have to hide or pretend. They are respected and valued. That is Charlotte's legacy. She fought so that future generations would not have to." Marcus looked directly at the cameras. "The palace made mistakes in how they treated Charlotte, but we cannot change the past. What we can do is honor her properly now. We can make sure her story is told, that children learn about her in history books, that her sacrifice is remembered." He stepped back from the podium. The room exploded with questions again. Journalists wanted to know every detail. How was the uniform found? What will the palace do to honor Charlotte? Are there other hidden stories like this? Will there be an official apology? Lord Ashford returned to answer questions. He announced that the palace would create a permanent memorial to Charlotte. Her uniform would be displayed in a place of honor. Scholarship would be established in her name for young women pursuing careers in security and defense. The palace would also commission a formal review of historical records to identify any other instances where service members had been unfairly erased from history. "We cannot undo the injustice done to Charlotte Hayes," Lord Ashford said, "but we can ensure it never happens again, and we can make certain that her courage is never forgotten." The press conference lasted 2 hours. By the time it ended, Marcus was exhausted. But as he walked out of the room, journalists approached him with respect, thanking him for sharing Charlotte's story. Several women in the media told him how inspiring they found it. That evening, Marcus went back to the storage room where he had found the trunk. It was empty now, quiet. He stood in the spot where the trunk had been hidden for 70 years. He thought about Charlotte putting her uniform in that trunk, asking Thomas Blackwell to keep it safe, hoping that someday someone would understand. "We understand now," Marcus said quietly to the empty room, "and we will make sure everyone else understands too." The next morning, Charlotte's story was on the front page of every major newspaper. Television news programs discussed her life. Social media exploded with people praising her courage and criticizing the palace for hiding her service. But mostly, people were inspired. Thousands shared the story, talking about how Charlotte's determination had paved the way for future generations. Within days, historians from around the world contacted the palace, offering to help research Charlotte's life further. Veterans organizations wanted to honor her. Schools asked for educational materials about her. The response was overwhelming and beautiful. 2 months later, the palace held a memorial ceremony. They unveiled a bronze plaque in the palace gardens, near where Charlotte had stopped the assassin. The plaque read, Charlotte Hayes, 1927 to 1998. Royal Guard and Intelligence Officer. She served with courage when courage required secrecy, and she paved the way for those who serve openly today. Marcus attended the ceremony in his full dress uniform. Uncle Peter came, now using a wheelchair, but smiling proudly. Margaret Whitmore traveled from Edinburgh, determined to see Charlotte honored properly. Current and former female guards attended, standing in formation to salute a sister they had never known they had. Prince Edward's grandson gave a speech, acknowledging that his great-grandfather's life had been saved by a woman the palace had tried to erase. He thanked Charlotte publicly and apologized on behalf of the royal family for the decades of silence. After the ceremony, Marcus stood alone by the plaque. Other people had left flowers, letters, and small tokens of respect. He placed his hand on the bronze, feeling the raised letters of Charlotte's name. "You did it," he said softly. "You changed the world, even though you never got to see it. Women serve everywhere now, in every role, and they do not have to hide. That is because of you." Marcus thought about the trunk in the storage room, about Charlotte's hands placing the uniform inside, about her hope that someday things would be different. She had been right to hope. The world had changed, slowly and painfully, but it had changed. As Marcus walked back through the palace, he passed several female guards on duty. They stood tall and proud, doing the job Charlotte had fought for. They would never know the fear of being discovered, the pain of being dismissed, the loneliness of living under a false identity. They could serve openly, earn promotions, be celebrated for their skills. That was Charlotte's gift to them. That was her legacy. Dr. Monroe continued researching Charlotte's life, finding more details about her time in Africa, her intelligence work, the lives she had touched. She was writing a book about Charlotte, determined to document every part of her story. Publishers were already interested, knowing that people would want to read about this hidden hero. Margaret Whitmore passed away peacefully 6 months after the memorial ceremony. Before she died, she told Marcus that seeing Charlotte honored properly was the greatest gift she could have received. She said Charlotte would have laughed at all the attention, insisting she had only done her job. But she would have been proud that her dream had come true. The scholarship in Charlotte's name received hundreds of applications in its first year. Young women from across the country applied, talking about how Charlotte's story had inspired them to pursue careers in security, military service, and intelligence work. Marcus served on the selection committee, reading applications from girls who reminded him of Charlotte. Determined, brave, refusing to accept limitations. 1 year after finding the uniform, Marcus was promoted to senior guard. During his ceremony, he wore a small pin on his uniform, a gift from the palace. It bore Charlotte's initials and the date she had stopped the assassination. He wore it every day, a reminder of the great aunt he never met but would never forget. The trunk itself was also preserved. The palace placed it in a museum exhibit about women's contributions to royal security. Visitors could see the trunk, the uniform, photographs of Charlotte, and read about her life. Children stood in front of the display asking their parents questions about the brave woman who had to keep secrets. Marcus sometimes gave tours to school groups. He loved watching young girls' faces light up when they heard Charlotte's story. They asked if they could become guards too, if they could serve and protect people. Marcus always told them yes, absolutely yes. Charlotte had made that possible. On the anniversary of finding the uniform, Marcus returned to the storage room one more time. It looked different now, cleaned and organized. But he stood in the same spot where he had opened the trunk, where Charlotte's story had begun to emerge from 70 years of silence. He thought about everything that had changed. The memorial, the scholarship, the book, the recognition. Charlotte's name was no longer hidden. Her service was no longer a secret. Her courage was finally celebrated. But Marcus knew the most important change was invisible. It was in the hearts of everyone who heard her story and decided to be braver because of it. It was in every woman who pursued a dream that seemed impossible. It was in every person who refused to accept that some roles belonged only to certain people. Charlotte had spent most of her life in shadows, doing important work that no one could acknowledge. She had died quietly in Kenya, far from home, under a name that was not her own. She had never received medals or public praise. She had never stood in front of cameras or given speeches. But in the end, her voice had been heard. Her story had been told. Her courage had been recognized. The uniform she had carefully folded and placed in that trunk had become a symbol of determination and hope. Marcus locked the storage room and walked back to his post. He had his own duties to perform, his own role in protecting the palace. But now, every time he stood guard, he thought about Charlotte standing in these same halls, proving that courage had no gender. She had been right to hope. She had been right to save that uniform. She had been right to believe that someday the world would be ready to hear her story. And now, finally, the silence was over. Charlotte Hayes would never be forgotten again.